big process that was happening where all the expats who had turned up were getting really high salaries. They started to be turfed out when the Russians realized that, well, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to be paying foreigners massive salaries. So that was happening while I was there in the first 4 or 5 years. So that was an interesting time to be around. So I had to really kind of work hard to show that I was, that I'd earned my spot.
This is the Adam Fayed Show for Expat Wealth, and I'm joined today by John Mark. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
And we were just chatting earlier, and what's interesting is we have a relatively similar background in terms of we both left the UK very early in our lives. So I left literally 24 hours after graduation, but you were saying you left about a week after graduation, right? So what was the story when it came to that?
Yeah, so I actually studied Russian and Spanish at university. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in, I think it's Hispanic and Latin American Studies and Russian and Slavonic Studies. And so I thought, what am I going to do with myself? I might as well go to Russia and get fluent in Russian. And I didn't waste any time. I just decided to go straight to Russia after university. About a week after graduation. Yeah, it just so happened that I managed to get a job in an advertising agency in Moscow. There was an English chap who thought it might be quite fun to have another English chap on his team. So I kind of squirreled my way through the back door into an advertising agency job, and that was the beginning of my career in advertising.
Wow, but Russia in those days, because was this like the late 90s or 2000s, right?
This was 2006.
It must have been a very different country to what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Was it hard to adapt, or would you say, considering you spoke very good Russian already, if not fluently, was it fairly easy for you just to adapt as a young person?
I'd say I'm quite a sort of adaptive person. I think in general it's very difficult for people to adapt just to moving to Russia from the UK. I think that's a huge difference in culture. It was actually something that I'm used to. I was used to at that stage because I'd lived in the UK. I'd lived in Spain. I'd moved back from Spain to the UK when I was a child. So I was kind of used to being kind of chucked into different cultures at that point because it had already happened 3 or 4 times. But at that stage, I couldn't speak Russian fluently. That was for sure. It took me about 1.5 to 2 years to actually become fluent, having been studying the language for 8 years up to that point. So it's a tough language. You can have the grammar and you can have all the vocabulary, but when it comes to speaking with a local, it's just a completely different story. And so I went out and just forced people to speak to me in Russian, and that's really painful for a Russian who's desperate to improve his English. So I was kind of super nerdy in that sense, that I just was desperate to get fluent as fast as possible. And obviously, full immersion is the only way to get fluent. And so that's sort of the environment I created around myself for that to happen.
Well, did that involve a lot of bars, restaurants, just normal places, and then you kind of immerse yourself in that way, right? I guess that's one of the best ways.
A lot of bars, a lot of restaurants, a lot of going out. In fact, subconsciously, the way I judged myself on my Russian was that when we were drunk, would people who were sitting at the bar realize that I was Russian or not, or that I was foreigner or not. And eventually I got to a point where I could go for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes without that person realizing that I was a foreigner. So that for me was that was the level.
Well, I guess the thing is as well, people get confident when they're drinking. So some people might overestimate their proficiency when they're drinking. So it could be a good barometer. So that's interesting then. So, but before that, I think you were also living in the United States for a year. Is that right? And then you actually studied and then went to Russia, right? Was the US not for work then, or was it related to studies?
So something that a lot of people do is after school and before university, they take a gap year. And I was one of those people, and part of that gap year was a season in a ski resort. That was just what that was about. So I was a ski instructor, but I was a beginner ski instructor, which meant I was teaching 3, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. These were one-on-one lessons where half the day you'd spend skiing backwards down the slope to make sure this 5-year-old little kid didn't disappear down the hill, and you'd get in massive trouble. So you could sort of catch the little kid going down the slope, and the other half of the day was just babysitting. I know, as a result of that babysitting, I know 4 or 5 Disney films completely off by heart. So that was my story of living in the US.
Well, I guess you got paid enough to live there, and it was an experience, right? So
it was a pretty basic lifestyle. I lived in a house with I think it was 7 other employees of the ski resort. And we all just sort of clubbed together for a lot of stuff. We all kind of took the bus to work. The tips were pretty good from the resort because it was a decent, kind of a high-level resort. But otherwise, it was quite a sort of a student-like existence, put it that way.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sure. And so you went to Russia, should I say, shortly after graduation. And would you say, even though you found it difficult to adapt straight away, you said compared to a lot of people that you are good at adapting, but still, as a relatively young person, did you find it difficult to really establish yourself in Russia? Or would you say at that time in Russia, the economic growth was very good, that you could really establish yourself quite quickly, or was it quite tough?
I started my life in a corporation, and it was just a matter of, working my way up. So it was tough. Funnily enough, it was 2006, so it was just before kind of the economic difficulties that were happening in 2008. And while I was coming up in that corporation, the kind of popularity of expats was rapidly going down. So I was kind of at a crossroads where I needed to sort of fit in with everyone around me. I needed to get good at Russian very quickly in order to not be part of a big process that was happening where all the expats who had turned up were getting really high salaries. They started to be turfed out when the Russians realized that, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to be paying foreigners massive salaries. So that was happening while I was there in the first 4 or 5 years. So that was an interesting time to be around. So I had to really kind of work hard to show that I was, that I'd earned my spot, So that was one fairly tough challenge. And that was sort of involved the Russian language as well, and sort of my professional, how good I was at my job.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I've seen a similar thing all around the world. So when I was briefly in Indonesia, for example, they were doing something similar at that time. They were making it more difficult to get what they called a kitas, which is like an employment pass, but not for entrepreneurs, but more like the expat who comes for 2 or 3, 4 years on a really good package and so on.
Right.
And you tend to find that happens all around the world, right? Eventually, there's kind of like some kind of like blowback against that, right? And then they try to localize. So you're even seeing it in some Middle Eastern countries, right? Like trying to make Saudis have more jobs and this kind of thing, right? So It's interesting you said that. So, all right, so you worked your way up, but then I think you started your own business at a certain stage in Russia, right? Is that correct?
That's right. So about 4.5 years in, I decided with a couple of friends in that advertising agency that I was working at that we could do things better. I was fairly naive at the time, but I was desperate to sort of start my own business because for me that felt like something I should be doing. So I made the plunge 4.5 years into my working life. So at age 27, I left that big agency. In fact, I left before my friends left and actually worked on building a company or setting up a company for a year before my colleagues joined me. My business partner sort of has a funny story about, I slept under a bridge for a year. At least that's what they imagined I was doing, while they continued to sort of feel comfortable and receive their big corporate salaries. and I sort of laid the groundwork. And then eventually a year later, they joined me. And funnily enough, we set up this independent creative agency at a time when that market was really screaming out for other options for advertisers to engage. What I mean is the following. So on the advertising market in Russia at that stage, there were only big network agencies. So big advertising agencies owned by international companies. And the way it worked was the big advertisers like Procter & Gamble, like Mondelez, although Mondelez was something else back then, like PepsiCo, like Coca-Cola, they all had big contracts with these network agencies, which meant the agencies, the advertisers, like PepsiCo and Coke, had to work with certain agencies. And this situation had been going on for quite a while, when they reached a point when those advertisers, the Cokes and the Pepsis, started to get a little bit frustrated with these sort of forced contracts, because those teams, they kind of got a little bit lazy because there was no competition. They had to work, PepsiCo had to work with this agency, had to work with that agency. And so what we did, we created an independent agency, a local agency, if you will, and there was a big push for those brands to start working with more independent agencies at the time. So when we set up, another 3 or 4 agencies were set up at exactly that same time. And then after that, there was just a boom of independent agencies that happened. So we really kind of hit a sweet spot. And in the first 10 years, we had fantastic success. So on the surface of it. So on the surface, we worked with Google, Lego, Renault. I think one of our first clients was PepsiCo at the time. So really big brands, really kind of, really good stuff. And from the outside, it looked great because some of the projects we were putting out there, some of the advertising was fairly breakthrough, very, very creative. But, and even our colleagues from the big advertising agency that we left, they used to call us the young millionaires. Little did they know that we were paying ourselves below market salaries. Our profit margins were pretty low, about 4 or 5%, terrible for that business. And we were sort of, barely making it from salary to salary to pay the 30 people that were then working for us 10 years in. And so we got ourselves in this situation where, on the one hand, it looks great on the outside. On the other hand, we don't know what to do because this business is just sapping our energy. We're starting to hate each other. We want to kill each other, me and my other partners. And we didn't really know what to do. So I and my other partners, we went out and kind of tried to figure out, maybe invite outside consultants to help us, just do something. And I found this book that you've got on your table there, Traction. And so I started reading this book, Traction, by Gino Wickman. And I realized this was the answer to all our problems. Basically, in this book, it talks about what's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And there are people out there called EOS implementers, Entrepreneurial Operating System implementers, who help you implement a business management system in your business to help you break through the ceilings, get more profit, get more of what you want from your business, basically. And so I read this book, and we invited an EOS implementer to help us. And so we worked with this implementer for 1.5 years. And long story short, we can get into the details about what it's all about, but 3-4 years down the line, went from 30 people to 100 people, profit margins from 5% to 16%. Most importantly, we still we're doing the great projects that we were doing previously, and my partners and I are still friends, and we still got on, and we still to this day run the business together. And one of the big advantages is that both me and my other business partner, we can kind of step away from a lot of the operations, and the whole house of cards doesn't fall down. And that's thanks to this operating system that we implemented almost 5 years ago now.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is this book, Traction, hopefully you can see this on the camera. I have been recommended this book before, and obviously we'll go into that a little bit as the conversation goes on. But what was interesting is you said something there which was fascinating. You said it looked great from the outside.
Yeah.
And that's quite a common issue, right, with businesses, right? Because I've noticed in the finance sector as well, there's a lot of companies will say, oh, we have so much assets under management, AUM, we have so many staff, we have so much, awards, we have this and this and this and this, so many clients.
Yeah.
But then often they don't focus on, okay, but what are our profits? What are, for example, our systems in terms of if we go on holiday, what happens as owners and things like that. Right. But when it comes to what you were doing, was it like a deliberate strategy though early on where you thought, well, okay, let's just take market share? Mm-hmm. Or would you say like maybe vanity as young men kind of, machismo, if you like, got in the way and you thought we just need to grow? Or would you say it was just none of that? It just happened organically where you grew without originally having that much profit?
I think what happened was, and it was a very deliberate strategy, we decided to concentrate on the quality of the work that we were doing and almost just, an extreme focus on the quality of the work. And as a business that's starting, that makes a lot of sense, right? You hear startups talk about focus on the product, and that's what that was about. We were obviously in a completely different sector where focus on the product is a really great thing, but it's not a sector where you're down the road going to get a whole load of funding that's going to sort of keep you going, and you've got time to figure out the business side of things. We had no funding, no investment, nothing like that. It was just all off our own backs. And with a company like that, in a publicly traded company, if you're bad at predicting, or if you don't have the basics and the fundamentals right, the share price goes up and down a little bit. No big deal if you don't hit your numbers. But if you don't hit your numbers in a small business, you're firing people, you're closing down, you're bankrupt. And it's a different story altogether.
And what's interesting as well is I think not all businesses are technology companies, because
right.
A lot of people, they'll look at like the Amazons of this world and those kind of companies that keep reinvesting profit, forgetting obviously not everyone could be Amazon, but also forgetting that in the technology sector, it might well work to say, okay, we've got more users, we've got more traction, to use the book's title, right? But in certain sectors, right, it doesn't work to not be profitable forever.
Exactly.
And I think there's many sectors like that, not just what you were doing, even law firms and so on.
Yep.
It doesn't always work just to copy the tech sector just because it works for them, right?
Yep.
So I think tech's quite an interesting one because profits aren't always the main metrics for tech, right? So
exactly.
And tech is such a big thing now that everyone thinks about the big tech firms, but it's like, does that really work for, the advertising agency down the road in Singapore or Dubai or London? I'm not so sure.
I think it feels like, and it feels like it's been happening for a while now, we're entering a kind of different era where fundamentals and profits, are actually a lot more important. We've been through an era with startups and tech companies, etc., where these companies can not be turning a profit for years and years and years, and that was okay. It feels now that we're entering a different era where fundamentals are actually more important, and you can see what's going on now in the US. Elon Musk cutting costs in the government and all this sort of stuff. It's kind of coming to a head now. This kind of era of businesses being allowed not to turn a profit kind of might be coming to an end, hopefully.
Yeah, and also I think people forget also in the kind of free money era of zero interest rates as well, it was much easier for companies just to keep reinvesting and so on. But now interest rates, 4.5%, 5%, depending on what the Fed does in the next few weeks,
right,
it's still much higher, right? So
true.
Yeah. So okay, so you started this business, you were struggling, maybe not to get good clients, but to like make good profits, and also you couldn't necessarily take a holiday without, working, otherwise the whole thing might have potentially collapsed.
Yeah.
Then you got this EOS implementer who suggested some changes and so on. Your profits went up a lot, and things got better. So in terms of like the fundamentals, what did they teach you like fundamentally that really helped your business? Obviously, they must have taught you a lot of things, but were there like 3 or 4 key things where you say, okay, those things really helped us in our business?
Yeah. So, if to narrow it down to 3 things, what EOS gives you, the first thing is about vision. So what it gives you is a way of staying 100% on the same page, at least on the leadership team level, about your vision and your specific plan to reach that vision. So that's the first part. Second part is around traction. So traction is about instilling behaviors, instilling discipline and accountability, so that you're actually executing, and wherever you go in the company, everyone is executing on that plan to reach that vision. That's the second thing. And then third thing, perhaps the most important, the process is designed in such a way to make the team itself, the leadership team first, more healthy, more cohesive, more open and honest with each other, and as a result of those things, you sort of start to relax a little bit, and start to have a little bit more fun at work.
Sure. Right. And so kind of drilling down into this then, let's say like, for example, month 1, month 3, month 10 or whatever, these EOS people came into your company in Moscow. They probably, at the beginning, I guess, they looked at your processes. They might have asked you certain questions and kind of tried to figure out how you're operating the business, right? And then did they then make certain specific recommendations, like say, okay, you need to delegate certain things, or how did that work, like dealing with these EOS people, like practically speaking?
So when you say dealing with EOS people, they don't work, they're not consultants. And I'm an EOS implementer now. I'm not a consultant. So the way it works is like this. An EOS implementer comes in, and on day sessions, just single day sessions, first of all, teaches you various tools. So on one day, perhaps it's 5 tools that you get taught. And a lot of these tools require input from the team itself. So for example, what's called an accountability chart, an example of one of the tools. It's like an organizational chart, but on steroids, because it shows you not only the structure of your business, but also who has what roles. And the idea, there's all sorts of intricacies of that accountability chart, but you're taught the principles of how it works, and then you're facilitated to create your structure to take your organization to the next level. And with that specific tool, there's a real epiphany that happens with that specific tool, where you start with structure first. So when you think about your business owners like myself, who have 20, 30 people, with no specific sort of business background or an MBA or anything like that, what happens is you start to think people first. Who can I put here? I just don't have this person. That's the way you think. And so with this accountability chart tool, just as one example, the way it works is that you go structure first. What functions do I need to take this company to the next level? And so I need someone to get the clients in the door. I need someone in charge of that. I need someone in charge of making the product or delivering the service, or both. I need someone to look after finances. The 3 basic things, and then those can split into 4, 5, 6, but you have to have those basic 3 functions covered. And what you find is, you'll find that the leader, who should be leading, managing everyone, showing the way, they actually find themselves in charge of this thing and that thing and this thing, and they find themselves in 3, 4, 5 different seats. Where in reality, in a well-run business, they should be managing the business, and they should have people that they're delegating to run this function, and this function. And so having designed and defined what functions you need to go 6 months, 12 months into the future, only after you've figured out all the roles, for each function, having defined all the functions that you need, do you even think about putting people into those positions, in potential people into those positions? And then you get to a point, normally after that first day and running through that tool, where you're still in a number of seats, but you're now aware, you have that awareness that, right, I've got to get out of this seat, I've got to find someone that fits those roles, and so that I can concentrate on doing this, the thing that I'm best at and love doing. And so that's just an example of one tool, but it's a matter of doing these day sessions, and after 3 full day sessions, you go into execution mode, where the implementer runs your quarterly meetings and your yearly planning session for a year and a half after you've done those first 3 day sessions. So that's basically what an engagement looks like with an EOS implementer, and that's an example of one of the tools.
Sure. So if we go back to your business, because it's really interesting how, like, you obviously were inspired by this framework because they helped you, right?
Yeah.
So you said your profit margins were about 5%, right?
That's
and then
right.
they went to about 16,
17, yeah.
Yeah. So what was the core reason, do you think, for that? Was it that you weren't delegating enough, or was it like also you weren't asking the clients for essentially more money, you weren't brave enough, or maybe you didn't feel you could ask them because you were focusing on the competitors rather than like saying, well, we could do better than them so we can charge higher? Or was it something else?
Yeah, so it's difficult to put your finger on one thing, but I can try and perhaps go back in time and figure it out. So we were in a place where we were completely 100% concentrated on the quality of the product, right? The quality of the work that we were doing. So all focus was in operations, which meant that sales and marketing was almost zero, and financial competence within the agency was close to zero. And so what this whole process taught us to do was put focus on marketing new business. And once you start marketing yourself in the right way, that affects how you can price. Because once you've got marketing materials out there telling the world how great you are, thought leadership, etc., all the prizes start rolling in because you're entering the right industry prizes, etc. People start to notice, and you therefore have a basis on which you can increase your prices. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, when we put the focus onto the finance function, you start controlling your costs, right? And you start trying to understand how we can efficiently run projects rather than just chucking all resources at any project that comes in the door. And so that kind of that striving towards higher effectiveness increased profits because costs came down, effectiveness went up, utilization was better, and then marketing helped increase prices as well. So that the combination of those things really kind of got us going in the right direction.
It's a common issue, I think, isn't it? Because it's true, sales and marketing, some companies are very good at focusing on it, right? But some product focus, shall I say, people are less likely to do that. Mm-hmm. But what you said at the end in terms of people not controlling their costs, mm-hmm. or not thinking about it enough, I've seen that a lot as well.
Yep.
I can remember many years ago, somebody I knew quite well who was a former management consultant. Mm-hmm. He said one of the key issues is a lot of people forget the cost is one side of the balance sheet.
Right.
And so people don't think about it enough compared to, say, they just think about revenue. Mm-hmm. So I guess when you're going into companies, do you also see some of the same commonalities, like not controlling costs, not delegating, not doing enough sales and marketing? Or would you say now that you're an EOS implementer, you see different things to what those people saw in your business?
So as an implementer, sometimes you can't see as deep as things like, is this company controlling costs, etc. But what you can see, what becomes immediately obvious, is whether a company has the right people in the right seats or not. What I mean by right people, right seats is right people are people that consistently display your values within the company and fit your culture. And then right seats are, do you have the right structure to take this company to the next level? And so what you find as an implementer, after you've really put that emphasis on the fact that if marketing and sales aren't strong, you won't get clients in the door. If operations isn't strong, then you'll get a client in the door, but they won't stick around for long. If finance is not strong, then you won't control costs, you'll have no profit. So once that hits home, that every single one of those basic functions has to be strong, then the wheels start turning, and they start thinking, right, oh yeah, we need to get the right person, the right qualified person into this seat, into this position, and into that seat. So that's really what you see first and foremost, people-related issues rather than finance-focused issues. Because once you've got the right person in the right seat, then it kind of takes care of itself, as long as you've correctly defined the roles and capabilities that that person has to have.
Maybe it goes partially back to what Jim Collins said in his book, right, where he said, get the right people in on the bus.
Exactly.
And then you kind of work out where to place them. But I guess being able to recruit the right people, is that one of the hardest things, I guess, for people to implement this agenda? Because, like, okay, let's say a company owner realizes, okay, I need the right people in operations. I need the right salespeople, but their resources are tight. Do you think that's a key issue? Obviously, for big businesses, they don't have that issue, right? Because I guess they can easily recruit. But for smaller and medium-sized businesses, I guess that's a big issue, right? How to recruit the right people as well.
I completely agree. And funny you talk about Jim Collins, but Jim Collins is credited by Gino Wickman as sort of, forming a lot of the basis for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And we, and it's absolutely right that we take the same approach as Jim Collins, as in get the right people on the bus first and then you'll figure it out. But yeah, so I think hiring goes wrong so often because you haven't put that strategic thinking into the structure, into the people that you need to take this company forward. Sorry, not the people that you need, but into the positions and structure you need and seats that you need in order to take this company to the next level. People, as I said, people get wrapped up in, who have we got now, who's available, rather than I've got these roles, the person has to fit these roles, rather than trying to fit a role around a person. So that's the thing that so often happens, which is where hiring and people issues sort of crop up.
I can imagine that's the case, yeah. But do you find, though, that most of the people you help, are they like medium to kind of larger businesses now who they don't necessarily have a resource problem? They can easily, set up teams, they can easily advertise and so on. Or are you also helping kind of smaller businesses that are struggling to just get a foothold in the market?
So EOS works with companies that have product market fit because it's about execution, right? So really you've got to get to that stage where, and 10 people is kind of the rule of thumb for the stage at which you've proven that this business model works, right? So that's kind of where we're coming from in that. I'm not talking about startups, tech startups that haven't made a profit yet. So that's kind of outside of the scope of EOS. But that 10 people normally is that kind of size that proves that you've got a business that you're selling the right services or the right product to the right client or customer. That's the idea.
And can this also work for companies that have, for example, a self-employed workforce or freelancers, or they're delegating a lot to agencies? Because there might be some companies out there, well, I know there are, who, for example, don't formally have 10 or 20, 30 people on payroll, but they might have an agency they're using for various things. They might have an external accountant rather than an internal one. They might have 5 or 10 self-employed salespeople.
Right.
Can this also work, or do you prefer everyone to be internal? Do you think the processes work better when everyone's like fully on the bus, or do you think it can also work with like self-employed people?
The most important thing for EOS to work in your business, and just caveat by saying the Entrepreneurial Operating Systems, it's not for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone, but it works when you have a leadership team. And so you can have effectively kind of a minimum of perhaps 3-4 people on your team and then a wider team of freelancers potentially, and the thing can work. Because what's important is that you've got specific people responsible for specific functions, specific people with whom the buck stops, who have the accountability at the end of the day for sales, for marketing, for operations, for running finances. Sometimes heads of those functions can be outside people, as long as they feel that accountability, as long as they understand that the buck stops with them for certain issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And did you start being an EOS instructor in Russia, or was it after you left? Because I think you left when the war happened, right, between Russia and Ukraine.
That's right. So I became obsessed with EOS after we implemented it in our company. And so just to say as well, so when the war started, Russia-Ukraine in 2022, on the 24th of February, I decided to move away from Russia, but we also decided to move the business away from Russia as well, at least partly away from Russia. And so since then, about 25% of our business comes through our Dubai office, our Emirates office. Because we've actually set up in Sharjah and Sharjah Media City, Shams, and so they get a little bit upset when I call our company a Dubai company. It's just a sort of a habit that I've got into. But yeah, we're a Sharjah, Shams company. So we made the move, and I became an implementer, having been obsessed with it about a year ago. And before that, I was helping friends and family with their businesses here and there implement certain things from the Entrepreneurial Operating System. But I qualified, trained up, and bought the franchise in order to call myself an EOS implementer about a year ago.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So in the last year, what kind of businesses have you helped? Have you got some great stories about some businesses you've helped in the last year?
Yeah, so over the past year, an engagement is quite a sort of all engrossing kind of thing, and I've worked with 6 clients over the last year, and they're from completely different areas. So, I've got a marketing research company, an Oxford research project that has a grant. I've got a consulting company in due diligence, a chemicals trading company, so completely different areas. And in fact, the value that these companies get is actually completely different. So for one company, it could be about profit. We're not making enough profit. For another company, it could be, I just don't have control over my business. And so my proudest moment helping some of these companies was when the owner of one of the companies, 6 months into working together, he said, "John Mark, I finally had a good night's sleep." So for me, that for me was the sort of crowning achievement over the last year. For one of my clients, it was really important because one of her goals was to create a franchise out of her business, and so one of the real benefits that she got for her business was that, on the one hand, they actually started solving all the problems that had built up over the previous 10 years of that business running. But on the other hand, they've started to make the processes that eventually will make up the franchise manual, which eventually she'll roll out to the various franchisees all over the world. So that's on the other hand. And then another company has increased revenue by 30% over the first 9 months. So it's a decent achievement. The main thing that business owners themselves feel, having worked with EOS and implementing it, is they just feel more control over everything. Because I think in the beginning, this system was created for visionary entrepreneurs who had enough appetite to risk to actually go out there and set up a company. Their companies had grown in such a way that they were sort of running around with I don't know, 20 assistants, them being the main person in the business without delegating any accountability to anyone, and everything hinged on them. And so on the one hand, you've kind of got control over everything because everything relies on you. But in order to grow, in order to concentrate on new things, you have to delegate some stuff to other people. And they have no idea how to do that. And so if they do delegate something or leave something for a period of time, then everything just starts to fall down and kind of starts not to work. So these visionary entrepreneurs, it's ideal for them because they start to feel that control come back. They start to feel that they can actually grow and stay in control of their business. So that's the main benefit.
Well, fantastic. And thanks a lot for coming in today. And how can people actually get in contact with you if they want your help and support?
So I'm on LinkedIn, quite easy to find, John Mark Fitzpatrick. And where else am I? You can find me on the EOS Worldwide site as well. So you can go into eosworldwide.com and then you can search the implementer directory and go to Dubai and you'll find me.
Well, fantastic. And thanks everyone for watching. Like and subscribe and share. And until next time, have a good day.